I'm the Communications Director for the City of Greenfield, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight to moderate the city's first virtual town hall. But first things first, I'm going to take off my mask. So we're live here tonight, this evening in Greenfield, in the studio of GCTV, and I'm here socially distanced appropriately with Mayor Wiedegartner and School Committee Chair Amy Proietti. So I'm thrilled to be here tonight, and as we all know, events of this nature, town halls of this type, are typically large public events where the public has full access to the event and can come and ask questions and share their concerns and express their views about the city. In lieu of that, and due to the world we find ourselves in these days due to COVID-19, we are excited to bring you this virtual event in lieu of that, and as a way to reach out to the community and have a way to solicit questions and field questions from the community and have a community conversation. So thank you so much again for joining and being here virtually. We are thrilled again to provide this virtual alternative and truly hope you find this event to be helpful, entertaining, and inspiring. The format of this event will include 30 minutes, generally loosely 30 minutes of discussion between the mayor and the school committee chair, and then we will open it up to questions that have been solicited from the community. I've spent the last week soliciting questions from the community in a way, in a manner to gather some input and some good questions and concerns from folks out there in Greenfield. So I have a collection of those here. In addition to that, viewers and participants are fully welcome to share any questions or concerns in the chat virtually on Facebook. And I have eyes on that as well, so I'll be taking a look as those questions come in. I've informed the mayor and the committee chair that we're going to have a diverse representation of the questions that were submitted by the community, and I look forward to those questions helping to facilitate this conversation. And I think seeing everything that's come over the transom, I think the community has done a really great job of providing great questions, and we'll have a good hour of conversation here. So again, thanks again for turning out virtually, for tuning into this event, and for participating in your local government. Again, this event should be in person and in public, but in lieu of that, and due to the pandemic, we are happy and thrilled to be here tonight, this evening, to present you with this virtual alternative. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce each of our guests this evening for a brief self-introduction. And to start, I am going to turn it over to Mayor Roxanne Wiedegartner.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for, as Keith said, tuning in virtually, and I look forward to this evening a lot. And thank you to GCTV for facilitating this and all the hard work they've done to get it set up. I am Mayor Wiedegartner. I've been in this job, it seems like 2 centuries, but it's really only been a matter of months. And I'd have to say there was something good that happened every day, most days, and even though we're in a pandemic. So I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with my colleague here, Chair Proietti, and let's get this party started.
Great, thanks, Roxanne. And next, I'll turn it over to School Committee Chair Proietti for a quick self-introduction.
Thanks, Keith, and thank you, Mayor Wiedegartner, and also thank you to your staff for supporting putting this together tonight, and of course, GCTV for getting it all on the virtual airwaves for people to participate and people to learn about what's happening in the city and the schools right now during this cliche, unprecedented time. As Keith said, I'm Amy Proietti. I have lived in Greenfield since 2002, and I have 2 children in the Greenfield schools. and I will probably mention a little bit about their experience tonight because I think it's relevant for specifically what we're here to talk about. And a little bit more about me. I work at Greenfield Community College. Before that, I worked at UMass Amherst. I've been in the area for about 25 years, and this is my first elected position. And Mayor Rita Gartner and I have been neighbors for since about 2006, before we ever either thought we would be in this position now. And it's actually comforting to have a partner in managing all of this in someone who I've known for longer than just what is it now, 9-10 months that we've been
like that. Yeah.
we've been in these positions. So I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. And I do also want to mention, before we get too deep into the conversation, that folks are always welcome to reach out to me as chair of the school committee, and I'll give my email address, and it's also available on the school district webpage under the school committee business. But it's AmyPro1, AMYPRO1, at gpsk12.org, O-R-G. And anyone is welcome to contact me. I always appreciate feedback from constituents.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you, Mayor, for introducing yourselves. So during this first segment of this event tonight, one of the things we thought would be a great idea to get this conversation started is, as we planned for this event, both the mayor and school committee chair did a lot of hard thinking about the work they've been doing over the past many months and what that has looked like this year. And so I know you both had come up with a couple questions for each other,
Yeah.
and I think that's going to be a great way to kind of get this conversation going. So I think Mayor, you are up first with your first question to Amy,
Okay.
and I'll turn it over to you now.
All right, thank you. So Amy, do you mind if I call you Amy?
I do not
Neighbor.
mind. I expect that you will call me Amy.
Okay. Managing and implementing school policy during the COVID pandemic has been a difficult nut to crack. I'm on the school committee as well, and I certainly understand that was not an easy thing to do, to get that thrust on you. So tell me about your process during the pandemic, or these last few months, in having to manage school policy and shift with all the changes and so forth. It's kind of a two-part question, but I'll let you start there, and then I'll ask the rest of it.
Sure. We were really not even 2.5 months into our school committee work as a new school committee, which you and I are both voting members. And then all of a sudden we started having to deal with the COVID situation, a lockdown of the city, the schools, my employer, everything changed in an instant in March. And I think as a school committee, what we have tried to do is be a support for the administration of the district. We're not there to manage anything like curriculum or day-to-day operations. We're there to be a check and a balance on what's happening with funding, what's happening with school safety. And we've tried to focus on the priorities of managing schools, which is our students. And number one, making sure that they are safe. I know anyone from the Greenfield Public Schools will say without question that our biggest accomplishment since March has been the food distribution, the lunch and breakfast distribution that was put into place the week that the schools closed down. And we, a couple weeks ago, passed 200,000 meals served. And I think that really for the schools represents, this newfound awareness of what schools have become. They've become a place for students to be fed, to have resources that help their families to be safe and have access to community resources that they need. And teachers are the eyes and ears of the community in many ways in keeping young people safe. And we've really tried to focus on that, number one. And then number two, trying to figure out how do you run a school during a pandemic. And it has not been easy. It hasn't been graceful. I don't think anyone thinks that we are in a position where we could be, well, people probably would say we could be improving. I was going to say we're working as hard as we can. We're being very transparent. And none of us have experience running a school district in a pandemic. And that's been the biggest struggle for everyone. But we try to, look at what assets we're creating from this, and also look at how we can do better at supporting the students and supporting the administration of the schools.
Good. Well, and in addition, as I do here in the city, and as I know you do on the school committee, there's other things that you have to do. I mean, we had to get through a budget season.
Yeah.
That was not, again, easy or comfortable, but it had to be done, and
Yeah.
similar things happen at City Hall. With regard to the pandemic and decisions that have to be made, if I know you were like me, and certainly superintendent, sometimes we had to make decisions really, really fast.
Yeah.
And tell people about it later. There wasn't a lot of time
Yeah.
to go around and say, what do you think, what do you think, what do you think?
Yeah.
We had to do things pretty fast.
I think a perfect example of that is one that we regularly deal with, and that is we very quickly in March chose the WebEx platform over Zoom for delivering our virtual meetings. And I continue to get questions about that. Zoom is the one people are most comfortable with. It seems a little bit more accessible. WebEx was developed for a business environment. And I actually feel like that is a decision that we made very quickly, and we made in the correct way, because it has a security and a stability that you still don't see with Zoom. And specifically for the schools, when you're talking about the security of an environment, you want to make sure you're using one that meets the standards.
Right. And in making many of the decisions that you had to make, particularly around how to care for the students and to begin to develop the remote learning piece on the fly, as you say, without a lot of experience in that. What did you do to ensure that the school committee heard from all impacted sectors, whether it's parents, teachers, or whatnot?
Well, we try to just be accessible. Try to make sure people, when we hear about concerns, feedback, questions that seem to be popping up regularly, we try to get information out to help with that. The environment that we're in, honestly, right now, our school committee members spend a lot of time on Facebook, on social media, on Twitter, and interacting with families in that way. That has its pros and its cons, but that's our reality right now, and that's a safe way to communicate. And so I think I'm very proud of the school committee members that are active in dialoguing with our constituents that way, because that is an important part of getting feedback right now.
Yeah, as you say, for better or for worse.
Right.
It has its pluses and minuses and so forth.
It does. Yeah.
With an eye on the time, let's take a moment here to pivot. And I know School Committee Chair Prodi, you had a question for the mayor as well.
I do. So I mentioned earlier that Mayor Wiedegarten and I have been neighbors for many years before serving together as elected officials. And what we haven't really talked about, because we're usually talking business, is what has this been like for you? What has this been like for you to walk into a new mayorship, and after a decade of the successor, your Bill Martin, and you're obviously very clued in to what needs to be prioritized and how things need to happen, and I've been very impressed with the way that you're managing the city. But what's it been like for you? We were just talking earlier about the flu pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's the best comparison to that.
Yeah.
Did you ever think you'd be in this situation, and how are you managing? How are you dealing with it?
Furthest
personally?
thing from my mind. I can tell you that. I expected there to be an event of some sort, a flood or some sort of big major event that could wreak a little havoc here and there. But a long-term pandemic was not even on my radar screen. And I get asked the question that you asked a lot, and I keep trying to come up with a short, snappy answer. But there isn't one. It was whatever it was, as you say, month and a half, not even really.
6 weeks in, we knew.
6 weeks in,
we were going to have trouble.
knew, and we really had to contemplate. Well, let me back up a little bit. I could not have done this. I mean, that's not on my radar. Wasn't on my radar. It's not on my resume. Didn't receive one question about what if there's a pandemic during the campaign. It just wasn't on my radar at all. However, I have to say that it was certainly on some of our department heads' radar in one fashion or another.
Sure.
And I have to really give a shout out certainly to Chief Strahan and Chief Haig and our DPW, but there's a part of them that knows how to manage crises.
Yes.
And I could not have done this without really the great people who work for the city of Greenfield and those who are in leadership roles, because really I was being advised even before we decided that, okay, we're in a pandemic and we have to declare a state of emergency and stuff like that by the two chiefs. And, they were both of them really, but particularly Chief Strahan kept talking to us about the number of ambulance calls they were getting. And it was like doubling and doubling and doubling. And he said, there's really something going on. It's either we're going to have a very, very bad flu season or something else is happening. So he kind of clued into that early on and began to start thinking and paying more attention to some of the news out there about the pandemic. So from that standpoint, I have been extremely lucky. The city of Greenfield has been extremely lucky to have the people that are working for them in leadership roles, and I couldn't have done without them. I really couldn't. Whether it's even the board, the Board of Health, my staff,
the Recreation Department.
the Recreation Department. Yeah. I mean, it touched us all.
Yeah, and I was impressed to see the place that the school department had in managing a pandemic.
Yeah.
I did not necessarily. It hasn't been my role. I didn't think about infrastructure and needing potential overflow spaces for hospitals, and that the middle school and the hospital share a campus.
Yeah.
But the superintendent and Chief Strahan were on top of those things, and trying to manage the logistics of it very early on.
Well, there were some very interesting days, not to mention that I began every day with a meeting at the Emergency Command Center.
Yes.
And as we began to watch the cases get identified, and certainly the situation early on with the nursing homes was the big trigger for, we've really got something going on here and we have to really work hard on it.
Yeah.
There was the one day where the chief told us that, we didn't know early on how much impact it was going to be. He said, well, we need to start thinking about where we would be putting literally dead bodies when there was an overflow, because if we have a morgue, it's not very big.
Yeah.
And there were some other, startling moments that gave me real pause. Things I never would have thought I had to do.
Yeah.
Turns out it was the ice rink, but even that was sort of.
What was the plan for the ice rink? Was that to be? For the morgue. Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Call it overkill. thank God it was, you know.
I think we
but
were all
you
feeling that way.
You always have to have that extreme plan. I'm learning that.
Yep, yep. And
And
you're
you
right.
have to learn how to shift.
The department heads all did a great job of coming
Yeah.
together to make sure we could, as a
Yeah.
city, manage those
Right.
pieces.
Well, we even talked about apropos of the schools, and I can't recall if anyone contacted Jordana on that, but, you know, the hospital was concerned about filling up.
Yep.
So we had to think about, well, could we use the middle school closest to the hospital?
Yeah.
Use the gym,
I do remember that.
for the cafeteria, for just turning it into a hospital.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. I remember very
Beds.
early on, both Chief Strand and Superintendent Harper shared with me that their first phone call with each other after the declared state of emergency was
Yeah.
Jordana saying, just let me know when you need the middle school.
Yeah.
So that plan, unbeknownst to many of us, had been in place for a long time.
Yeah, no, that's what I learned. It is
yeah.
our second emergency operations area.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, for rescues of any kind, whether it's from hurricanes or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
So I'm keeping an eye on the time, close eye on the time, and I think we're going to pivot for this. One last question, and this is a question from, you have, Mayor, for Amy, correct?
Yeah, well, it's along the same lines. You're not unlike a lot of parents, grandparents, guardians, people who have children in their households, who are also managing careers, managing homes, their own home, taking care of other people other than their own family members. It might be an elderly parent or someone. And now also having to take part in educating your children. So I want to flip the table and ask you, how was that for you? What has been your experience with this?
Yeah,
You have two great children, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I have not prioritized talking about my experience as a parent right now. With my public role, I've really tried to focus on the school committee business. And I recognize that I can share my story, and that it is in the same vein as many, many other families out there. My second grader is very special needs and doesn't yet read or write. And I think I'm killing it in second grade. Actually, I think I'm, you know, I'm really coming along.
Okay,
I'm
good,
waiting for that first progress report. But we literally, as parents, have to sit with him the entire day. And I am, you know, as a parent right now, very, very grateful for having chosen a career path where I am in a union. And I have, you know, protections around the changes to my own job, but also the flexibility of using my accrued time when I need to. And right now, the path I've had to choose to be able to get my kids to be successful in remote school is to take vacation time for a good chunk of every week of the every week since March to you know, take care of my kids, be a mom, and be a part-time teacher. I am not a very good teacher. Those folks are at least not a very good elementary teacher. I think you could argue that in my profession. In college financial aid, there's an education component, absolutely. I have a master's degree in education, so I understand you know, what the focus needs to be, but I do not know how to teach a second grader with special needs how to read or how to be interested in numbers. And for me as a parent, there's definitely, as I was sharing with Keith earlier, there's definitely an elevated level of stress right now. We're into the second week of full week of school, and I think that, you know, if the troubles that I have had managing the schedules for remote learning are any indication, we have some really stressed parents and students out there. And it's been, for me as a parent, it has been absolutely very stressful, but there's also been so many pieces where I feel grateful for what I have and am constantly looking for ways that I can support others who are struggling, because we have to, really be a resource for each other to get through this.
Yeah. And I don't know how you feel about this overall managing the pandemic in the schools in general, if there was anything that either the state or federal government could have done to make it easier.
Oh, we need another couple hours for that,
Well,
Mayor.
I kind of thought I would open up a can of worms. So I
We
can
need
quickly
another couple
close
hours for that.
I can quickly close that can of worms.
Well, I'll just say this: the schools have gotten, public schools in the U.S. have gotten $0 for education purposes from the federal government. We have not been told yet by the state what our budget will be for this year. That has already started.
Yep.
And we can't operate a school district that way. And that is the simplest way to put it for anyone who wants to understand what's happening. We need support from the government, and they have failed us since basically January.
Yes.
Yeah.
Since January. Yeah, I would have to agree with you on that. I mean, we at the municipal level, we've gotten help through COVES, from CARES Act and FEMA and so forth and so on. But the education piece, both at the state and federal level, the state was certainly lagged behind in their decision-making processes.
Well, and I think it's important too to mention, to try to help people who may not understand the CARES Act funding. The schools did also get a piece of CARES Act funding.
Yeah.
And when it's a grant or an allocation of that type, you are not able to just go out and spend those funds on whatever the district needs. There are very specific categories of expenditures.
Yeah.
And the general things you need for running a school, like bus transportation, can't be part of the CARES Act. And that's when managing all of this almost becomes like, you feel like everything is kind of a house of cards that has started to fall in on us a little bit.
And I think the one question that I see a lot coming from the community are the comments, and I think we can, just mention this briefly. People not understanding why we might not have gone immediately. I mean, we have low numbers here, and for that I'm grateful, and I hope it stays that way. But they don't understand why we might not have gone immediately to at least a hybrid or or everybody back in school type of thing. And I think the message that we fail to convey, because it's detailed, is there's also air exchange requirements and a lot of things that we just simply, as a city, we're not prepared financially, especially this year, to take care of. So, we only have so many schools, and we can't put the children in all of them. It doesn't mean we're not working on it and that we're not going to come up with that plan, as we progress and as the numbers. I mean, I think literally I heard today from an official that Massachusetts has done a real good job of completely reaching a plateau. Hopefully it will stay there. We're approaching October, the beginning of flu season and perhaps a spike. But if we can just sustain that level plateau, we can begin to think about how to bring the kids back into school, because I think it's really important.
I do too.
It's important there are so many working families in Greenfield, 2-parent families, 2-income families, most of them really.
Yes.
And it has to be an extremely difficult situation for them out there, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer in terms of the expense to get it to happen, and also there are many layers to feeling safe in the schools, whether you're a teacher or an administrator or a parent or a student.
Yeah, that's another piece.
Or a custodian. We have to be sure that we have the staff who feel comfortable to be able to be there, and that our students and families feel like they're making a solid, safe choice for their families by sending their kids to in-person school.
Yeah.
And those conversations are very, very important right now.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. So we're going to pivot now, keeping an eye on the time. We have about a half an hour left in this program. And so now we're going to pivot to some of the questions that we have fielded from the community. And I want to take a moment here again to just say thank you to everyone in the community who submitted questions ahead of time for this event, and who have been submitting questions live via the chat. It's a great way and a great alternative to a real-time in-person event. And thanks again for doing that. So one quick question that came up in the chat, it comes up all the time, is where are our masks? We started with masks.
Yes, we did.
And we are socially distant.
Yes.
So just to make that point, we think about that very carefully and all the time.
And I
Yes.
think that it's really important that we are heard.
Yes.
And so I feel safe sitting
Yes.
here.
So let me go to some of the questions that we've received from the community. The first one, as by design for this event, we've kind of fielded some questions around school issues and city issues. So for the first one, I'm going to go to schools. And one of the questions that came up ahead of time from Elizabeth and was also chimed in by someone on chat is, what's the process going forward for the superintendent search and piece of that puzzle? What does that look like? What are the next steps there? In addition to that, is there any mechanism for the community to be involved in that process? If so, what does that look like? How do folks get involved? What are the best ways in which members of the community who are concerned about that search or that issue to get in touch?
Sure. I appreciate the question. Of course, it's going to be a popular question right now. At the beginning of September, the Superintendent Jordana Harper did send a letter to the school committee indicating that this being the third year of her 3-year contract, that she would not seek an extension on her contract in Greenfield. And that leaves us 10 months with the superintendent in place to begin to look at succession. And we have not started that process at all yet. All of that process that we can make public will absolutely be made public. Mm-hmm. That includes timelines. It absolutely includes public participation. The important piece to understand is that we will be using a third party to help us with a search for a superintendent. That is generally a practice that's used to first to take the burden of making any mistakes or making sure that the process is professional and wide-ranging. We want to take that burden off of the school committee. And we also want to have experts who are helping us look for an expert to succeed our superintendent. And when you hire a firm, they help you to put in place the best practices. And that will include plenty of notice for opportunities for public participation. But we do expect that search to be starting up soon. And as I said, at least the initial pieces and as much as we can make public throughout the process will absolutely be done in public session. And I'm looking forward to getting started. It's not something I've participated in before at this level, so just add it to the 2020 experiences,
well,
right?
I participated in one as a school committee chairperson.
Oh, good.
So
This will be your second.
Well, it's actually my third because I was a citizen representative on the search committee for Jordana. I mean, the one in which she was chosen.
Yep.
So it's really my second one. And it's actually kind of an interesting process, but it is very structured. People do need to understand that.
Yes.
And the interviews are not always able to be public, but
Correct.
we do have an opportunity, and I'm hoping at least there'll be a school committee representative on that search committee, but I don't know how they do it now. For sure.
We'll look to the experts for guidance, and we'll be getting that process. It's actually on the agenda for our meeting on Thursday of this week on October 1st.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Great. Thank you so much. So the next question I'm going to offer up is for Mayor Wiedegartner. This question came in from Mary and is kind of focused on the city. And Mary asks, I'm very worried about what the winter will bring for our restaurants in Greenfield. I know the city got some funding to help businesses make additional modifications to deal with COVID challenges, but will that really be enough to help them during the coming months? Are there any other grants the city can apply for or any other strategies the city is thinking about for supporting restaurants as we turn towards these cooler months?
Well, It's a good question. I don't have all the answers to that question. We certainly have done everything we can up to now to ensure that our restaurants, which are a significant part of the revenue that we have, and certainly a significant part of what draws people to Greenfield and makes life better for people in Greenfield. So we wanted to make sure they were taken care of, and we did have an opportunity to take advantage of the Shared Streets Grant, which gave us the outdoor dining options that we have. We have had a second round of that grant, and we have focused it still on outdoor dining to a certain extent. We've bought additional, instead of barriers, now everybody will get planters. And we bought outdoor heaters so that for those days that are not too cold but also not that warm, there'll be outdoor heaters. So moving into the winter, what can we do? Well, I was very pleased that the governor lifted the opportunity for restaurants to serve indoors if they do it correctly. So it'll be a busy winter for our Board of Health, ensuring that all the questions get answered from restaurants. But I think the ability for them to move indoors is critical. And we just met, Chief of Staff Danielle Laternia and I today just met with MJ to talk about long-range economic development now that we seem to have some breathing room here. And what to do going forward for restaurants through the winter and how we can help is a piece of that. Right now, most of them were reaching out for the outdoor heaters, anticipating that the governor would not lift the restrictions, but he did, so they can pivot a little bit. I'm still concerned about bars. It's a tough decision whether to open them or not open them, but I don't want to see them left out. We have quite a few, and they're nice watering holes for the community, and I think they should be able to open up, but I also see across the nation what the reverse of that is. So I think that's a piece that needs to be worked on. And there's some fee adjustments, particularly for those people who hold liquor licenses that we are talking about in City Hall and how to relieve them on those fees to the extent that we can. We can't tell the state not to do it, but there are some things that we can do.
Great. Thanks, Mayor. For the next question, we'll pivot back to school. So this one will be for Amy. And this is something that, as someone who, in the city and as a city have been watching these pandemic numbers daily, hourly, for months now. Could you talk a little bit? This is a question that came in from Elizabeth, and she talks a little bit about the map that the governor's office. Releases every week that shows where your town or city is. Are you in a certain color category, or are you trending in the right direction? Yeah. So that's a tough moving target to manage, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about about the school's process for making those decisions, and what do you do for parents or families who may want to return to school earlier than later? And how do you kind of address that big of a moving target?
That's the well, I was going to say $1 million question, but maybe that's the $750 question. I don't know. Right now that's an impossible question. And I'll break it down in a few ways. First of all, shame on our government, federal and state, for politicizing public health. That's the number one thing that is behind this map. I understand that Charlie Baker and the state of Massachusetts is getting pressure that we can't even imagine from the federal government to fulfill their own ends to reopen schools. And it's completely unfair to take science and politicize it. There has been zero investment in making our schools safe, and that map, it hasn't been around for that long. So I bet it's been around for 2 months, that
Yeah.
color-coded map.
Yeah.
So I would ask anyone who's interested to go back and look at each week's map and see. It's like blinking Christmas lights on the state of Massachusetts. It's completely unrealistic to use that to decide if schools are going to be in-person or remote or hybrid. It has nothing to do with a stable learning environment. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And then, to address the other major piece of this is the CDC, the national body for managing guidance around public health, and also DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in the state of Massachusetts, both released thick guidelines about HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And to ensure that people could be safe, we needed to meet those guidelines. And the reality for our systems in our buildings, for the most part, is that they recycle air because it's better for the environment. However, when you're talking about virus spread through airborne droplets, those systems are not safe. And we actually went to Siemens, the company that installs our HVAC systems, and they told us that they would not discuss any fixes until we paid for engineering studies for each of our buildings. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars that we don't have, and
I'd say hundreds of thousands.
and that could be,
Yeah.
for 6 buildings, that could very well be. I've become more of an expert than I wanted to on HVAC,
Yes.
but I am not an expert on engineering studies, nor do I really want to be an expert on both of those things.
Yeah.
But what has happened with this situation, again, is political. The week that we were to submit as a school district our plans to the state for remote, hybrid, and in-person learning, DESE rescinded the HVAC guidance that they had put out only 10 days before.
Yeah.
So it's either true or it's fake news, and I don't understand why you would put all that effort to it in the first place if it's not something we need to be concerned about. And I don't quite know how to, as a local elected official, rectify, again, the politicization of public health. It's completely, it goes against all of the community response that we need to be focused on in this time. And that's what school committees across the nation are dealing with right now, is you have to follow these guidelines, and then, oh no, sorry, these are the new guidelines a week later. We can't possibly operate a school district that way.
Yeah.
You'll probably hear me say that at least a couple more times before we finish.
Yeah, and releasing guidelines is one thing, but if they're not going to release funding as well or give us funding for that, that wasn't planned in our budget.
Right.
And then we don't pull it out of the sky.
Right.
So I suspect they were rescinded because all of the communities started saying, with what money?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Right. But now are our schools safe, or
Yeah.
are they not safe?
You're right, yeah.
And that's a question we unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon how you want to phrase it, we have to be able to answer that question before we can easily put students
Yeah.
back in schools.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think related here is a good segue. We've had a few questions come up both on the chat this evening about the tents. And I think either, you could potentially both field this one, but, providing some information and an update on there, I think would address some of the questions that have been coming over the chat this evening.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start.
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
wanna fill
because
anything.
I don't know from anything where the tents are concerned, other than I know they're there and they had a purpose.
Yep.
And maybe that purpose has,
Well, I
been
think we have
taken
to,
care of
there is a
elsewhere. I mean,
purpose for them.
yeah.
I think the important thing to remember is that we're only into the second full week of school.
that's right.
And our focus has been on putting together a curriculum for our students to be able to learn.
Yeah.
We also saw an opportunity, that Superintendent Harper saw an opportunity very early on in April to secure an outdoor covering, a covered space for each of our schools that we actually could afford. We also looked into, and will still have on the table for at least the immediate future, if not longer, building pavilions at each of the schools instead of tents. So it would be a poured concrete surface with a cover that's a more permanent structure. And the expense of those is pretty shocking to me.
Oh, yes.
We're talking
Tell
about...
me about it. I know all about temporary buildings.
Yeah.
Again,
We're talking
more than
about-
I want to know about.
Yeah, to be transparent, we're talking about between $600,000 and $700,000 to
Yeah.
put those in.
And where's that funding come from?
We don't have that funding.
That's right.
That's why we haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
We don't have the money to put in $700,000 worth of pavilions at our schools, although there's a huge argument to be made that they would be a long-term asset to the schools, particularly because we don't know how long this will go on. And we, I think, rightly need to be prepared for other novel viruses and pandemics that may come along.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that we've learned from this that is definitely more of a possibility as we go on.
Yeah.
I don't.
But I don't want to
I want
skirt
that
the
to not
question.
be true.
Yeah, and I don't want to skirt the question about the tents, because that's not what
Yeah.
I'm doing. There is every plan to use those tents,
Yeah.
and we are still working out the pieces of getting students back into the schools. It is not easy to put all of the logistics together to make that happen, even for small groups outside. You're talking about transportation, you're talking about staff who have had their whole way of working change, and staff who are unionized. When your staff is unionized, it's important to understand that if you change their working environment, they are allowed to go through a process called impact bargaining, where they restructure the expectations of their performance as employees. And it's very important to understand that that process must happen. And I actually wish more people were unionized. I have heard horror stories about protections of jobs recently, and it's really important that workers be protected and be safe in their work environment. You couldn't have imagined a year ago a grocery clerk feeling like they were on the front line of anything, but here we are. And our district is working really hard with our employees to put together a new normal for their working environment, and that does take time. And they have been working at it for many months now. And the other piece is we have to figure out how to transport kids to schools. And is it for part of the day or for half the day? And is it okay if their parents drive them one day or they get picked up by the bus the next day? And how are they going to get fed? How will we manage that process if we have them in person versus the feeding program that we have in place now that's distributed? And these are things we need to work out. We need to be able to communicate them, and we need to have the staff to put them into place. So the tents, we have every intention of using them. We have them rented, I believe, through the end of November, and hopefully the weather will cooperate and we'll be able to put them to use.
Thank you. This is a question that came in. I'm going to relay this one for Mayor Wiedegartner. This is a question that came in, and the question is, can the mayor provide more frequent updates on the state of the city? It would be great to hear directly from the mayor more often. Is it true there is a blog in the works?
Well, yes, it's true, in the works. You just keep reminding me of that, Keith, every day.
Yeah, and it's something we've talked a lot about.
And it'll help. But yes, it's definitely true, and it's, I'm a writer, so I like to write. Given a choice, I'd do that all day long. But I have other things that I have to do as well. So there'll be a blog. It won't be weekly by any stretch, but we'll do that. And then this is great. This is an idea we came up with. We hope to be doing these teletown halls on a quarterly basis, and well, at least a quarterly basis. And if people like them a lot, we may do them a little more often than a quarterly basis. So, I mean, there is lots to talk about. Sometimes I think, well, really, I mean, what do I talk about? But be mindful also that there's, in some cases, things that we can't talk about, at least not in great detail. So I want to take every opportunity I can to talk to the people of Greenfield. We were certainly doing a lot of press conferences in the early part of the pandemic, and I felt like they helped for the most part. The pandemic has, as I said, it's subsided. Our preparations and our continual planning for it has not, but the urgency isn't worthy of a press conference every week or so. So, you know, I'm happy to take suggestions from people about how they might also want to hear from the mayor. I think you, Keith, and others, Chief Letourneau, do a good job on the social media piece. So it was part of the communications plan and the reason we have a communications director. So stay tuned. There will be more.
Great, thank you, Mayor. For this next question, this comes from Carol, and this is a good question about civics in the schools. And Carol asks, well, she states first that the history curriculum is an important opportunity to speak about civics and civic responsibilities to children and to teach. The Massachusetts curriculum has recently updated its civics component. Carol asks, how is the Greenfield Public School System going to be sure to include those curriculum updates?
That's a really interesting question. So the first thing I would want to say is it's important to understand that the school committee guides policy, but we do not set the curriculum. We are looking to oversee that any state requirements, any federal requirements, any local requirements, or other requirements that come up are being met. But we don't actually make the choices around how that is implemented. That is left to the superintendent and their staff. What I would recommend is that question actually be sent to Superintendent Harper, and it's helpful for her to get those questions from the community because she's very good at incorporating those things into her superintendent's report at each school committee meeting. And I think that's an excellent one to bring up. We don't necessarily, even as school committee members, know about things like curriculum changes without relying on the superintendent to inform us of them. And that's how I would leave that one, but I appreciate the question very much for both the opportunity to educate and the opportunity to increase awareness about what is changing and how we will respond to it. So thank you, Carol.
Where's Luke Martin when you need him?
Great, thank you.
History teacher at the high school.
Yes.
And this question has come up both in the chat and during the discussion tonight, and I think it's a good one. What are in both of your best opinions, what are the best ways for residents of Greenfield to advocate for additional support from the state or federal government, or what are the best things that they can do to help support and try to increase either the level of grant funding or other state or federal funding that's coming into the city?
Well, that's why we have state legislators, and they are very responsive. There's a lot they can do, and there's a lot they cannot do. I mean, for instance, right now we know that Chapter 70 is going to be level funded. That's our school aid, basically.
That's the baseline, the basic school aid is called Chapter 70.
School aid. It is shared by the city because some of it goes to costs that the city incurs, primarily around health care and health insurance and insurance and retirement and stuff like that. But that is the basic aid, and so it's level funded. And they've extended their budget through October, I believe. So, but I think you can always advocate for the schools by contacting your legislators and certainly letting us, CC us and let us know that you've done that. And when we can, we'll follow up with them as well. But because I know they do want to be responsive.
Yeah, and that's at both levels. I would recommend, Paul Mark, Joe Comerford, as well as Jim McGovern,
Right.
Elizabeth Warren, and Ed Markey. They are the folks that need to be hearing from our constituents. They have heard from us. They know where we stand. They are advocating for us. As with many problems, especially at the federal level, Greenfield and Massachusetts and Western Massachusetts aren't the issue with the holdups. It's, but it's still important for Elizabeth Warren or Jim McGovern to go to their caucus and say, I've gotten 35 phone calls from Greenfield this week about school funding. Yeah. That means something, and that's how this game is played. We shouldn't be playing games with funding for public education, but here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Great, thank you both very much. One last quick question. I think there's a couple quick ones here we could chip away off. One came in about the IEP process. How is that working these days, Amy?
Oh, IEPs. So
Yes.
IEPs are
Sorry,
individual
education.
Sure, individual education plans for students that need a modification to the curriculum they have in the classroom for any number of reasons. We have a full team that works on IEPs within the schools. It's very complex. It's very detailed, and it's individual, meaning each student that is on an IEP has a unique plan for just them that's looked at regularly once or twice a year and renewed every 3 years. And that process becomes incredibly difficult in a remote environment. And I will be very honest that there are huge concerns. We absolutely know that in every school district right now that is working remote or hybrid or even in person under new standards, we are potentially failing students on IEPs. I said from the beginning when we shut down the schools in March, I said we are about to lose decades of progress for students with special needs, for English language learners, for students who have behavioral issues in the classroom, for students who have learning disabilities, and on and on and on. We literally are losing decades of progress because that progress is predicated on a free and equal education for all of our students, and meeting that in a pandemic where caregivers become educators, as just one example, is a huge problem, and it won't easily be sorted out. And what I can say as the school committee chair is that I'm aware, as in my role, that we need to be on top of this. As a parent, I have seen the struggles to put my own child's IEP into place and meet its expectations and meet my child's education. And we need to figure out some better ways of managing it. But again, it takes resources, like a lot of the other things we've talked about tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And let me say, I think we are about out of time. So I am going to, wait, do we have time for one more question? I'm getting a signal. No. 1 minute. Okay, so we are indeed out of time. And so we're going to wrap things up. And so I want to take a moment here to thank GCTV, again, Greenfield Community Television, for allowing us to use their space and their technology to have this virtual event, again, in lieu of a public town hall. I want to thank Mayor Wiedegartner for being here tonight. I want to thank School Committee Chair Peretti for being here tonight. And as the mayor mentioned, you know, this will hopefully be the first in a series, and we hope to bring you more of this type of programming. I wanted to make a quick pitch here for one quick thing about the 2020 census. The city of Greenfield is on the brink of besting our 2020 record our 2010 record with the census. So if there's anyone out there tonight or tomorrow in the city of Greenfield who has not completed their US census, please do so. We are 2 percentage points away. We are right there. And
filling out the census helps more than calling your senator about funding for schools.
Because there's where our funding comes from for lot of
for a long time.
It impacts the community in the city for 10 years.
It isn't just a simple ask we're making.
That's right.
Yes. So please,
do
I
the
think
census.
this plea, we will get over that line. And I hope in the next coming days, we are announcing that we have surpassed our 2010 response rate for the census, and we are ensuring that everybody in Greenfield is counted. With that, I will close and say thanks again, everybody, for being involved in this event. Thank you, everybody, for participating and viewing. It's important to be part of your municipal government and your local government, and you're doing just that this evening by being here and being a part of this. So thank you so much. On my behalf, I want to say thank you, and good night, Greenfield.